کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو، بانو کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو، جنگل میں مار ڈالا ہے زہرا کی آل کو، زینب کے ساتھ روتی ہے سب مل کے بیویاں، زینب کے ساتھ روتی ہے سب مل کے بیویاں، جب دیکھتی تھی روز وہ وقت زوال کو، بانو کہاں تلاش. صلوات علی محمد و آل محمد. زخمی جو رن میں فاطمہ کا گل بدن ہوا، اور پرزے پرزے تن میں لباس کہن ہوا، غش پشت ذوالجناح پہ شاہ زمن ہوا، دشت علم سے چاک نبی کا کفن ہوا، زخموں کے منہ سے خون کے دریا ابل پڑے، سر ننگے قبر سے شہ مردان نکل پڑے، مظلوم کہتا جاتا تھا میں بے گناہ ہوں، مارو نہ مجھ کو سبت رسالت پناہ ہوں، تم لوگوں کا خدا کی قسم خیر خواہ ہوں، اس قول پر خدا کو میں رکھتا گواہ ہوں، کچھ رحم نہ آتا تھا کسی نابکار کو، شمشیر مارتے تھے غریب الدیار کو، نیزہ لگا جو سینے پہ تھرا کے رہ گئے، بیٹھا جو تیر ماتھے پہ تورا کے رہ گئے، گرنے لگے تو ہاتھوں کو لٹکا کے رہ گئے، شکر خدا زبان سے فرما کے رہ گئے، اکبر نہ تھے جلوم میں نہ عباس پاس تھے، مظلوم بیچ میں تھا عدو آس پاس تھے، سینے پہ بھالا رکھ کے گرایا حسین کو، جی بھر کے ظالموں نے ستایا حسین کو، گرنے پہ خاک تودہ بنایا حسین کو، ہے ظلم کی یہ حد کے غشایا حسین کو، پر دیکھیے حواس शहंशाह ने के सजदे में सर झुका दिया, हाथों को टेक के। पानी वो मांगता था, पिलाता नहीं कोई, इस दर्द को ख्याल में लाता नहीं कोई। क्या कहर है कि पास भी आता नहीं कोई, सीने से बेहया को उठाता नहीं कोई। अम्मा तुम्हारी पीटती है, बिलबिलाती है, वो बेटे से लिपटती है, हूरें छुड़ाती है। सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि
سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نستعين اهدنا صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله، والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين، الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين، والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والعصمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والإبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الرضبية والجود الثقبية والنقاوة النقبية والحيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim assalam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatima al-Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The month of Muharram began, And just like that, the day of Ashura had finished. We spent this series examining different aspects of that day which became immortalized in history. We examined the unfolding of the historical events leading to the day of Ashura. We examined the du'as and the supplications of Sayyid al-Shuhada from the day of Ashura. We examined the Quranic verses recited by the Imam upon the day of Ashura. We examined the sermons of the Imams from the day of Ashura. We examined the statements of the companions, the battlefield poetry, and many other aspects of the day of Ashura within this series. But when you look at one impact of the day of Ashura that we find which continues, is that the day of Ashura has played a profound role in the creation of a Shi'i identity. When you look and you examine the different communities across the United States and across the world, and if you ask them that within your devotional life, is there a time period within the year which carries a particular significance, you find that most within the Shia community will point towards these 10 nights of Muharram. That Shahr Ramadan and the act of fasting has its own place and its own position. But you find that this remembrance of Imam Al-Hussein is something which became an identifying marker for the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam from the day of Ashura until today. We see this from a number of levels. From the first level, this identification with the day of Ashura and the remembrance of Imam al-Hussein is based upon the emphasis of the traditions of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. The Imams of Ahlul Bayt went through great efforts, so those people within that time period knew about the martyrdom of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and that emotional connection built through the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein. For example, Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida, salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi. Imam al-Rida is seen crying upon the day of Ashura. A companion by the name of Rayhan ibn Shabib, he comes to the Imam. He says to the Imam that, why are you crying? Ibn Shabib is replied to from Imam al-Rida by the Imam saying that, oh Ibn Shabib, do you not know that Muharram has begun? And then, oh Ibn Shabib, this is that month that my father, innahu dhubiha kama yudbahu al-kabsh. That within this month, my father was slaughtered in the manner that a sheep is slaughtered. You see from this tradition, the first thing that we learn is that this individual, although he was a confidant and a companion of Ahlul Bayt, he did not know what time period it was. And that goes to show is that there was a process through which the Imams would acquaint and emphasize the remembrance of the martyrdom of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and through that emotional connection, it becomes an identifying marker. That's why we have one tradition ascribed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. That tradition of the Prophet Muhammad says that inna liqatl al-Hussein hararatan fi qulub al-mu'minin la tabrudu abada. That when it comes to the killing of Sayyid al-Shuhada, you find that there is a fire within the hearts of the mu'mineen, and that fire will never subside. So the first level of Ashura being an identifying marker of a Shi'i sectarian identity revolves around the emphasis of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. For example, we have traditions which say that the Imams emphasize the azab Sayyid al-Shuhada in Mina at Hajj. That Hajj was seen to be a time period of geopolitical significance, that people of different lands, they're gathering in the same place at the same time. They're coming from different villages. They're coming from different backgrounds. And you find the Imams of Ahlul Bayt are emphasizing the remembrance of Sayyid al-Shuhada And in that way, that becomes a common language. So the point I'm trying to get across is that when you look within the Shi'i community, you find that there are those from the background of the subcontinent. There are those who are Urdu speaking. There are those who are Gujarati speaking. You find there is a large population of Tashayyu within Iran and Azerbaijan. You find in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, even in Turkey, there's a large population there as well. But you find that the name of Hussein is a common language. And although individuals may not be able to discuss with each other based upon a common language, you find that this act of gathering, these majalis, this outward form, is something which the Shia community identifies with, even though the practice may differ from community to community. So from the first level, we find this element of the day of Ashura informing a Shi'a sectarian identity. From the second level, when you look historically, you find that there was an immediate historical identification by many who wanted to show themselves as the group which was aligned with Imam Al-Hussein. For example, we have examples in the early Maqatil that almost immediately after the martyrdom of Imam Al-Hussein, that a group of individuals in Kufa, they went to the graveside, they went to where the bodies of Imam Al-Hussein and his companions laid, and we find that there is the recitation of poetry. So you find these poetic utterances which came in a specific style about Rita and Martia and mourning and lamentation for Imam Al-Hussein. You find this genre of poetry became an identifying marker as well. There was groups of individuals who, because of their devotional poetry to Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they gained that particular identifying marker. For example, an individual like As-Sayyid Al-Himyari. As-Sayyid Al-Himyari was a poet who wrote in the praise of Ahlul Bayt. And As-Sayyid Al-Himyari was not a Sayyid in our understanding of Sayyid, that somebody who was from the lineage of Fatimatul Zahra salamullahi alayha. But he was a Sayyid in the sense that the Imam says, you are Sayyid al-Shu'ara, you are the leader of the poets. And Sayyid Al-Himyari would come to Imam al-Sadiq and the Imam would have him recite poetry. So you begin to see that there were a number of companions and a number of individuals that began to gain prominence because they partook in the remembrance of the martyrdom of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And further than that, there were groups historically that aligned themselves with the movement of Imam al-Hussein and tried to identify themselves in that manner. For example, there were a group of individuals in Kufa that when they were not able to be with Imam al-Hussein in Karbala because of their own decision making or other circumstances, they felt a type of guilt. And to overcome that type of guilt, you find that they carried out a movement against the Umayyads, and this group was called the Tawwabun, and those individuals who are those who repent. So you find that this is the second level. But the third level, when you look at the role of Ashura in forming a Shia sectarian identity, is that you find that many of those dynasties which came after the day of Ashura and which wanted to gain a favorable standing from the Shia population, they used Ashura as a symbol for their own political affirming of their own hold. For example, within the time period of the Buwayhids, we see that the Buwayhids would use the Ashura processions as a way of honoring the leader over there as well. We find there are elements in the Safavid rule in Iran where the Safavids would use symbolism, and that symbolism would be related to the day of Ashura, and in turn the population would give them a form of legitimacy. And we see this in the modern world as well, and I don't want to go into examples with specific names at this moment. So the key point that I'm making is that the day of Ashura has served as a key role in the formation of our identity. And the key aspect about the remembrance of the day of Ashura, of course, revolves around Imam Al-Hussein. You see, many poets, they said that, their Islam is re-enlivened after every Karbala, for example, the poet says. Now, although he is saying this metaphorically, in reality, there cannot be in every Karbala. Because although, yes, the battle between dhulm and the battle between haq and batil is ongoing, for there to be a Karbala, the wujud and the very presence of somebody like Imam Al-Hussein is a condition for it to be Karbala. And when you find that reality, you find that that entire day of Ashura revolves around Imam Al-Hussein. That's why the goal over these previous 10 nights and these upcoming nights in Muharram, as you attend these different lectures, is to gain an understanding into the personality of Imam Al-Hussein. And when you gain that understanding into the personality of the Imam, then you can see that what traits am I able to echo at my capacity and what traits of the Imam that I'm distanced from. Without a doubt, even if we pray 1,000 units, we'll never become like Amir al-Mu'mineen. Because the status of the Aimma is something which God has given them. It is not a status which is only acquired through their efforts. Without a doubt, they struggled in the way of God. But that element of being God chosen and being the vicegerents of Allah, that element is there. So it's key for us to understand who Imam Al-Hussein was. And when you look in the lifetime of Rasulullah time and time again would try to emphasize to the Muslim Ummah that it is fundamental for you to understand the position of my grandson. A hadith will say, Al-Hassan wal-Hussein imaman qama o qa'uda. That Hassan and Hussein are imams, whether sitting or standing. Another tradition will say, Al-Hassan wal-Hussein sayyiday shabab ahl al-Jannah. That Hassan and Hussein are the leaders of the youth of paradise. Another tradition would say, Ahabballahu man ahabba Husayna. That Allah loves the one who loves Hussein. Another tradition will say that Rasulullah is walking. Imam al-Hussein is on the shoulders of Rasulullah. And a man will say, look how excellent the ride of Hussein is. And Rasulullah will say, don't say how excellent the ride is, but rather say how excellent the rider is upon that moment. You see, all of these different traditions were for us to recognize Sayyid al-Shuhada. But a question which I want to conclude upon this series of majalis is that, is there a position for Imam al-Hussein mentioned within the Holy Quran? You see, there are many ayat which generally speak about the virtues and the fadila of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, and without a doubt, those verses, they apply to Sayyid al-Shuhada. For example, the verse will say, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. That I ask for nothing in return except for love for my family. It applies to Imam al-Hussein. The verse will say, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلِ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. That God has kept away all impurities from you, O Ahlul Bayt. Without a doubt, it applies to Imam al-Hussein. The verse will say that, is there not a group who gives out of the love of God within the way of God to the orphan, to the traveler, to the needy? It applies to all of Ahlul Bayt and Imam al-Hussein alayhim salam. But you find when you look at the works of hadith and the commentaries found within, there is one place within the Quran that it is stated that this address, in reality, although it was revealed in the time period of Rasulullah, the best misdaq referent manifestation of that verse is Imam Al-Hussein. And that is the verse of the Quran that says, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiya. That, O contented soul, return to your Lord. You are pleased with Him and He is pleased with you. That why is this verse? It is stated that the most clear manifestation of this verse alongside of Rasulullah is Sayyid al-Shuhada is the question of analysis. You see, from the first reason that this verse has such a strong connection with Imam al-Hussein is that according to the tradition of Imam Jaffar al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, this entire chapter of Surah Al-Fajr has been called the Surah of Imam al-Hussein. And this verse is contained within Surah Al-Fajr. Imam al-Sadiq in a tradition says, Iqra'u Surat al-Fajr fi fara'idikum wa nawafilikum. That recite Surah al-Fajr in your mandatory prayers and in your regular prayers. And the summary of the tradition is that the one who does this will be raised with Sayyid al-Shuhada and the companions of Imam al-Hussein upon the Day of Judgment. You see, when you look at this chapter, the first ayat of this chapter, it says, Wal Fajr wa layalin ashar. That God, He takes an oath by the time of Fajr and by the 10 nights. You see, the reason God takes an oath, when you and I take an oath, it's for somebody to believe us. Somebody, they don't believe us, and we say, I swear upon this, and in that manner we get that individual to believe us. But the reason that Allah takes an oath is very different than why you and I take oaths. The reason Allah takes an oath and a qasam within the Quran is, number one, for mankind to reflect upon the object of the oath, and number two, for mankind to reflect upon the reply of the object. Whenever there is an oath within the Quran, there is a qasam. There is something which is called Jawab al-Qasam, or the reply to that oath. For example, in Surah Al-Shams, وَالشَّمْسِ وَالضُّحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا. In the verse it goes on, that by the sun and when it shines, by the night and when it reflects, and after it gives that entire series, it says that قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. That successful is the one who has purified his soul, and destroyed is the one who has neglected that soul of a human being. So all of these different oaths and qasams was for mankind to reflect that what is the value of purifying one's own nafs and their soul, and what is the dangers of neglecting that. In the same way, when you look at Surah Al-Fajr, there is a series of oaths. And the first of those oaths is Wal Fajr, by the daybreak. You see, from the outward level, when you examine what the word Fajr means, the word Fajr means, from the etymological perspective, to break something in half. And the reason the time of Fajr is called Fajr is because لِأَنَّ نُورَهُ يَشُقُّ ظُلْمَةَ اللَّيْلِ. That the light from the time of Fajr at daybreak, it cleaves apart and it breaks the darkness of night. When Allah says Wal Fajr, the first reason He is saying Wal Fajr is that He is swearing upon the time of Fajr. And the time of Fajr has a great emphasis. The Quran says that Inna Quran al-Fajr kana mashhuda. That the recitation, the salat of Fajr, is something which is witnessed by the malaika, that both the angels of the day and the night, they gather at that time, and you find that the Salat of Fajr has a specific spiritual propensity in man's development. For example, one of the reasons which lowers the rizq and the sustenance of a person, one of those reasonings is to neglect Salatul Fajr. and to neglect dua at the time of daybreak as well. And you find this is something which lowers one's sustenance. But at the same level, that although there is an outward presentation, there is an outward meaning, there are many different fajr which are referred to by this ayat as well. For example, one hadith says that when it says wal fajr, the inner interpretation is the rising of Imam Sahib al-Zaman alayhi salam. That in what manner? In the manner that the Salat of Fajr is that time where light penetrates the darkness of night. In a society of hardship in Akhir zaman, his being is that which will give light to that society. That's why when they said to Imam Sadiq that how can we benefit from an Imam in occultation? The Imam said, you benefit in the way that you benefit from the sun behind the clouds. You see, in this time period, it's of vital importance that one keeps a relationship with Imam Sahib al-Zaman. Whether that relationship is to make dua for him, to give sadaqah upon his behalf, to speak with him. Because there's many speakers in the world today, there is a genre of thinking that says that we cannot establish the wujud of Imam al-Zaman as the son of Imam Hassan al-Askari. And don't be surprised if that thought, there are members of those who uphold that thought in your community as well. And that is something which is very dangerous. So you find that that relationship and that understanding of Imam al-Zaman is something which needs to be there, wal fajr. Another interpretation of what fajr means from the inward level is that this fajr is in reference to the fajr of the day of Ashura. Because in the way that light is able to cleave darkness, you find that the day of Ashura is that event which is given light in every confusion and hardship in the life of a person. You know, we say that in Ziyaratul Arba'in, that, oh Imam Al-Hussein, you made this sacrifice, you struggled in the way of Allah, لِيَسْتَنْقِذَ عِبَادَكَ مِنَ الْجَهَالَ وَالْحَيْرَةِ مِنَ الضَّلَالَ. That you did all of this to save the servants of Allah from ignorance and from the perplexity of misguidance. So you find this line of Ziyaratul Arba'in goes to show is that Karbala is a living movement. That wherever the chance of misguidance is there, wherever a person is losing their direction, wherever they're in a state of perplexity, you find that this event contains a number of incidents which are able to guide you within your life. And we examine them over the last 10 nights, that an individual like, for example, Abu Tumama, that he says to the Imam, "O Imam, the time of Dhuhr Salat is coming." And the Imam says, "O Abu Tumama, may Allah remember you because you remember the time of Salat." You find that's a lesson. Imam Al-Hussein, when he comes to the land of Karbala, he purchases the land from the tribe of Banu Asad. That is a lesson. Imam Al-Hussein, he knew the reality of his grave. He didn't want to be a disturbance towards others. And in that manner, you find Karbala is a complete university. And you find one reality of this verse is that it applies to the wujud of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And you find that is manifested within the ayat as well. Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna. That have you ever seen an individual who went through difficulty after difficulty like Imam al-Hussein in Karbala? His 6-month infant is slaughtered. A son like Ali Akbar, his brother, his children, his women to be taken captives. But that Hussein on the day of Ashura, he says, Allahumma anta thikati fi kulli karb, wa anta rajai fi kulli shidda, wa anta li fi kulli amrin nazala bi thiqatun wa udda. That, oh Allah, you are the one that I rely upon in every hardship. And you are my hope in every difficulty. And in every matter which comes upon me, you are my source of support, O Allah. That this is that individual, radiyatan mardiya, that he was content with God. You know, you and I, when we face difficulty, the most we have is sabr and patience. Ahlul Bayt are those individuals that in difficulty they would thank Allah. And that is Sayyid al-Shuhada, that he is a radiya, and at the same time Allah says, "O Hussein, I am pleased with you." That dome where you're buried, the acceptance of dua to me is under that dome. And that dust which touches your body, O Hussein, that dust I will make it khaq al-shifa. And imamat and divine guidance will continue through your lineage, O Hussein. That despite all of these realities, you find the body of Imam Al-Hussein laid in Karbala for 3 days. You know, as Ahlul Bayt, the family went from Karbala towards Kufa. There were a number of difficulties which they would face in Kufa. That when they would go to Kufa, the head of Imam Al-Hussein would be in front of Sayyida Zainab. The head of Imam Al-Hussein would be in front of Kulthum. The head of Imam Al-Hussein would be in front of the 3.5-year-old daughter of Imam Al-Hussein. And Ibn Ziyad would take a stick and he would poke the teeth of Abu Abdullah. And a companion by the name of Zayd bin Arqam would say that, by God, I would see Rasulullah kiss that lip which you are hitting with a stick at this moment. You know, when Ahlul Bayt was in Kufa, a lady comes up to the daughter of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And when she comes up to Sakina, she says, "Oh girl, make a dua for me and take this as sadaqah." She looks to Sayyida Zainab. Sayyida Zainab says, "Oh ladies, we do not take sadaqah. We are from the household of Ahlul Bayt." But then that lady says, "Then can this girl make a dua for me?" You know what dua that was? That lady says, "Pray that in the way that you are yatim, my children don't become yatim. In the way that you are alone, pray that my children aren't alone." But then she says, "Pray that I can go to Medina." Sayyida Zainab, when she hears Medina, she says, "Who do you know in Medina?" That lady says, "I know the house of Rasulullah, the house of Ali and Fatima." She says, "Do you know anyone within that house?" She says, "I know Hussein, I know Abbas, I know Zainab." Sayyida Zainab says, "Oh Habiba, if you want to know Hussein, that is the head of Hussein. And if you want to know Abbas, that is the head of Abbas. And if you want to know Zainab, then I am Zainab." You know, when they entered Kufa, Qasim, the son of Asbaq bin Nubata, the companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen, says, is that as I would watch the Ahlul Bayt enter Kufa, I would notice that all of them are on one rope. You know, when elders and children are on one rope, you'll find that people are of different heights and sizes. And he says that in front of them would be the head of Hussein. But you know, after that he says that as I was looking, I noticed that there was a head tied to the horse of Hurmala. And whenever the horse of Hurmala would go, that head would hit the ground. And when that horse would stop, that head, it would hit the horse. I would say, whose head is that? They would say that that is the head of Abu Fadl Abbas. You know, the day of the 13th of Muharram, it came. The tribe of Banu Asad was out in the plains of Karbala. They had made their promise that they would bury the bodies. As they were out in the plains of Karbala, they noticed the bodies scattered and there are no heads upon the bodies. As they're thinking that how will we bury these bodies, from the direction of Kufa, an individual, he comes up and he says, "O Banu Asad, make one grave for the companions." You find the tribe of Habib made one grave for Habib ibn Madahir. After that, as they're burying the companions, they say, "Oh man, there is a body by the Furat. When we pick one side of the body, the other side falls on the ground. When we pick the other side of the body, the other side falls on the ground." The Imam says, "That is the body of my uncle Abbas." Imam Zainul Abidin buries Abu Fadl Abbas. After that he says, "O Banu Asad, step back, for only a Ma'soom can bury a Ma'soom." Imam Zainul Abidin, he places a cloth on the ground. He begins to gather the pieces of the body of his father. He places the body of his father in the ground. After that, they bring the body of a young man. The Imam says, "That is the body of my brother Ali Akbar." His father loved Ali Akbar. Bury Ali Akbar by the feet of his father. As Imam is Sajjad, he's placing the body of Imam Al-Hussein in the ground. A voice comes from the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada. That voice, it said, "Tifli, Tifli, where is the infant?" Imam Zainul Abidin says, "O Banu Asad, where is the body of the infant?" He places Asghar on the chest of Hussain. He writes on the grave, "Hada qabru Abi Abdullah الذي قتل غريب واتشانا على لعنة الله للقوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا ويا منقلب ينقلبون." Ya Allah, we ask through the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Wherever they're in need, grant their hajat. I pray for this community, for the success of this community. If there was any shortcomings on my behalf over these past 12 nights, I ask for forgiveness. And I want to thank everyone who's gone out of their way to show their hospitality, whether it's Raza, these other brothers who've been attending every night, whether it's the brothers who have come out and attended the lectures. I pray for each of them, and I pray for this entire community. And I pray that all of you have the tawfiq to be with Imam Sahib al-Zaman. When the return of Imam al-Zaman it happens, Matam Hussain.
या पास ऐसा आलम है कहाँ, ऐसा जवां है कहाँ, ऐसा आलम है कहाँ, ऐसा जवां है कहाँ। ये है अबू तालिब का घराना, इस पे खुदा का खास करम है। सारे अरब में सारे अजम में किसको मिला ये जाहो हशम है। इनमें कोई यासीन व मुज़म्मिल, इनमें कोई सरदार इरम है। इनमें कोई यासीन व मुज़म्मिल, इनमें कोई सरदार इरम है। उसकी अलग ही शान है मौला, जिसको मिला है दर का आलम है। ऐसा आलम है कहा, ایسا جواں ہے کہاں، ایسا علم ہے کہاں، ایسا جواں ہے کہاں، کیسا سجا ہے کیسا ہنسی ہے، کرب و بلا میں شاہ کا لشکر، یوں تو سبھی ہے شیر دلاور، آن محمد قاسم و اکبر، ابن مظاہر وہب قلبی، جان بھی حر بھی سارے دلاور، ابن مظاہر وہب قلبی، جان بھی حر بھی سارے دلاور، اپنی جگہ یہ سب ہے بہت تر، فوج میں تیری عیش صفدر، ایسا علم ہے کہاں، ایسا جواں ہے کہاں، یا حسین یا حسین، پر محمد والے محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم۔ السلام علیکم یا رسول اللہ، السلام علیکم یا علی المرتضی، السلام علیکم یا فاطمہ